Councillor Jamie has to get out of jail pass for an hour from now, since she has, to say goodbye to her son. There we go. He's not going to jail.
He's just going to come back.
It's like jail.
It's jail.
It's jail-like. Actually, Neville knows everything about it. It's like it's frozen hell. Are we recording?
We are recording.
That's frozen hell. There we
Harder on
go.
you than him.
All right, here we are at 7:08 and council chambers on a pre-snowing evening on February 7th. Everybody's got their agenda. Can I have a call to order? And there being quorum present, adoption of the agenda, first and second, thank you. The agenda, all in favor? Yes, good. No public participation?
Not yet.
And you'll be quiet, good. Review of the approved minutes that you've seen for all of 8 seconds, so, and most of it was in camera, so not to worry. Can I have a mover on the minutes? Any? Yes, thank you, Norm. Second, good, thank you, Neville. Any changes? Since Fred, you were the only one there.
Oh yeah, the other guys are electronic. Ah, yeah, I don't see anything.
You're fine with it?
Yep.
Good. All in favor of the minutes as they stand? Good, accepted. Business arising from minutes. Who knows? Unfinished business, none. Reports, none. And here we are at new business, asset management presentation by Urban Systems. Take it away.
Wow, thank you. My name is Corey from Urban. I'm here to chat with you guys today about asset management investment plan. Probably take about half an hour to an hour to go through the presentation, but I think it's meant to be more of an interactive discussion, so stop me if you want me to explain something or you have some questions. I've had a chance to work with about 60 communities across BC developing these plans, so if you have any questions about how other communities are handling it, what they're doing, some of the challenges, I can kind of highlight what they're doing. So for the agenda today, first I want to start out by zooming out and giving you some context of what's happening across Canada. Next we'll talk a little about what is asset management. People always have the question. Why is it important? And then we'll get into the results for Lions Bay specifically. So what's happening across Canada, and I guess that's the point I just want to iterate, it's not just Lions Bay having this conversation, it's every community across BC and Canada. And essentially what has happened is a bunch of assets were installed back in the day, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, depends when the community was developed. The assets provided great service to the residents. People could shower, turn on their taps, flush their toilets. But now those assets are getting old and they need to get replaced. And what communities have done is they haven't financially prepared for the replacement of their assets. And again, that's every community across Canada and actually the world. Quite interesting. So this is a situation everyone's in. It's actually reached FCM, which is a national voice for municipalities, and it's now a national issue. And they are talking about it and building awareness. So you're not alone in this. Any questions about Canada and what's going on there?
What is going on there?
That is a good question. Essentially, it's reached the national level, so FCM knows asset management's important, and they're putting attention and trying to build awareness with politicians of all levels to say, hey, we're in a little bit of a pickle here, so we need help. So people are talking about it, it's a conversation, which is the first step to making change happen. So.
Am I allowed to ask a question?
Yes, Tony, go right ahead.
Would it be fair to say that quite often municipalities are pricing services as a cost of operations, but they're neglecting to put it in the cost of capital replacement, and that's what's caused the problem?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. So that's what communities have been very good at. They cover O&M. You know, you got to cover wages and expenses that come up, things break, you got to fix it. But what they are not good at, to your point, is planning for the future, putting away the money to replace those water pipes, the assets under the ground, the treatment plants, that sort of thing. So. But very nicely put. So what is asset management? At the end of the day, it's a lot of words or whatever, but I think it's really just preparing for the future in a responsible way. That's I think at the core of asset management, and being stewards of your infrastructure. So it's really about looking, just like you plan for retirement and you want to be able to retire and live a good life, it's the same thing with the community. So this is kind of jumping into some of your points there. So what communities typically do, and this is the new way of thinking they need to move from, is they're very backward looking. So what did we spend last year on buildings? What did we spend on roads? And they just escalate it forward. But instead, communities need to look forward and allow this data to inform, you know, it doesn't matter what we spent in the past. What is the data telling us about the future? So that's an important kind of mind shift change. And also using information and data to help understand these things. So historically, communities just didn't have the information at hand, so they couldn't make the decisions. It's long term. You know, councils, everyone's kind of on a 4 or 5 year term. You gotta create a 5-year capital plan, financial plan. So everyone seems to have blinders on in short term. But it's important for asset management is to look out 20, 30, 40 years. Because you have expensive assets that last 100 years. And they eventually need to get replaced. So that's a key lens on asset management, is to look outside 5 years. It's about long-term sustainability. Another core concept, which we'll get into a little bit more, it's really about the trade-off between investment, risk, and level of service. So we'll get more into that. Those are 3 core words you'll hear anywhere. Read any document, go to any conference. Those are the core concepts, so we won't get into that too much. And the last point I have, it's a journey and a continual improvement process. So everyone wants perfect information, perfect data, the solution to all problems right away, but it's a journey and it takes time and you just have to get started. If you wait for perfect information, you'll never get started. And if you try and get it, you'll invest $1 million trying to get it. And at the end of the day, it won't help that much more. So it takes time, it's a journey. You know, it took what, you know, communities 100 years, 80 years to get into this situation. It's going to take them some time to get out. So why is asset management important? Communities are lifelong businesses. They don't go away, they don't get acquired, they don't sell themselves. They're forever. So you have to think kind of long term is one important reason. Also, it's about splitting the pie equally. So essentially the idea is we don't want to undercharge people today so that one day in the future we have to raise rates substantially to pay for things, but we don't want to overcharge. So the idea with asset management is how do we split that pie equally so everyone pays a fair share for what they receive. I think
it's too late already then, from what you told us, right? We're already undercharged in the past, so you have to overcharge now.
Well, I will say, like, looking at the data and looking at yours, like, I think it's a great time to be talking about it. Like, I don't think it's too late. I think in 10 years, 15 years, it might be too late. So there might be a way to actually, yes, maybe it's not split equally, but I think you can get the slices pretty even. You're not too far down that path.
If this is a national kind of a crisis, as you said, is the goal of, I can't remember the group.
FCM?
Yeah, is their goal to raise awareness with politicians to perhaps provide more grants to communities to be able to get a grip on these before all of this kind of situation?
Yeah, good question. I'll talk a little bit about the granting side and like their lens on things. But their whole awareness piece is like helping like have this conversation. They want people to have like
They just
people like
want people
me.
to talk about it.
Yeah, and
Okay.
start thinking about, hey, you need to start planning for the future because if you don't, it's going to be bad news. In terms of grants, kind of the lens, I talk with the province a lot, and they're kind of they're not doing this now, but their lens is that communities should be sustainable on their own. Like they should be able to replace their own assets. That's not really their role at the end of the day. They believe their role is more about planning for the unexpected. New regulations, 4321. You as a small community can't plan, you know, they're going to make this new regulation. Climate change, you know, those are unexpected things. So that's really, I think, what they want their role to be. And their message is that, hey, let's help communities sustain their own assets. And you'll see in any grant app now, do you have an asset management plan? Are you continually improving it? And if they do give you a grant for an asset, they want you to prove that you can pay to replace it at the end. Because they don't want to give you a new reservoir and then say, you know, 100 years you guys come back and say,
We need more money.
we need another reservoir.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that makes
that's kind of their Teaching us to fish. Yes. And it's about kind of ensuring the services you provide today can be provided in the future. So that's kind of a core goal for asset management. You don't want to, through lack of planning, not be able to provide a service that people want. And it's interesting, I talked a little bit about that, but it's also sometimes helping communities realize that maybe they offer too many services and maybe they're living outside their means. Just because you inherited a bunch of infrastructure or services doesn't mean you necessarily have to continue to provide it. And that's the cool thing about this conversation. It's up to you to decide what you want to do, whether you provide services or you don't. And they're all trade-offs there. I was thinking, I just inherited, my grandparents are still alive, but I inherited a Sprinter van. And I don't know, like, I'm going to use it for a bit. I don't know if I can afford to keep it though, because you got to pay for the insurance and the tires and this and that. So just because I inherited doesn't mean I need to keep it, so I might sell it. So I think that's the same thing with communities. Sometimes they've inherited a lot of assets, but doesn't necessarily mean they need to keep providing those services. So. And this is the last one. So why is it important? It helps you get grants. And I know as a small community, grants are a very important piece of the puzzle for you guys. So now that you have an asset management plan, you can check the box. But the major thing there is that you need to check the box, but prove to them that you're continually improving. So you just didn't do a plan, put it on a shelf, and you're doing nothing about it. So yeah, helps leverage senior government funding. So the asset management investment plan, version 1, really the purpose at the end of the day was to help you as leaders in the community understand the health of your infrastructure. And we'll get into how you understand that. And it also has helped you understand the long-term costs associated with replacement of assets, which will help you kind of answer some questions around how much do we invest. So that's really the purpose of version 1. So to help you understand the health of your infrastructure, I call these vital signs for your assets. So, you know, just as you measure your heart rate, your blood sugar, your cholesterol to measure the health of your body, there's also metrics that you can measure to understand the health of your assets. So these are the 6 that are pretty common, kind of best practice things to measure. The first one's replacement cost. So that's how much does our assets cost to replace. That'd be in today's dollars, like for like, not accounting for bigger reservoirs, wider roads. This is just to keep the assets as they are. It's interesting because it feeds the replacement schedule, but also I think it helps build awareness with the community and saying, hey, we own X million dollars in assets. Because I don't think citizens always understand how expensive this business is. Millions of dollars in assets. So it may be something to share when you're talking to residents or even share in a newsletter, just to build awareness around the cost. The second one is remaining life. So this helps you generally understand the condition of your assets. So it says, how far into the life? Are you halfway into it? Are you a quarter? Are you almost at the end of it? So it helps you understand where do you sit on that scale. Value consumed is the financial value consumed in the asset. So say this laptop is worth $100, it lasts 10 years, and you're 5 years into it, $50 of financial value has been consumed. So it's an interesting metric for a reserve conversation because you can see how much financial value has been consumed and how much you have in the reserve, and it's just an interesting conversation.
Is that always considered on a straight line?
It's straight line. It is straight line. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
This one though, I would never say that's how much money you need in a reserve. That's like never possible, nor do I think it's the right answer, but it's a healthy piece of information to start talking about reserves. Number 4, this is the North Star metric. You can forget about them all. Number 4 is the most important. It's a deficit. So by definition, it's an asset that's past its expected life, but still providing a service. So I think about it like your car, you're driving it, it has 300,000 kilometers. It probably should be dying soon, but it's still running good. And there could be a couple of reasons. Maybe you're doing good maintenance to it. Maybe it's a good quality car, that sort of thing. So this is the most important thing. People take it as a negative. They always hear the word deficit and they, get scared. It's a healthy thing to a certain extent. So you don't want a huge deficit, but you probably don't want the deficit to go away. You might be overfunding. So the question is, what deficit level is right for your community? And we'll get into kind of what that can measure in the slides coming up. Number 5 is life cycle costs. So that would be a very simple calculation, but how much you need to put away annually to replace the assets at the end of their life, their estimated life. So again, if this laptop is $100 the last 10 years, you should put $10 away a year so you can replace it at the end. So we'll talk about that one, and then the replacement schedule. This is not a capital plan. It looks like one maybe because it's pretty fancy, it has some charts and graphs, but all it does is helps you generally understand the timing of the replacement of the assets. So they're not grouped into projects yet, but it's just understanding, do we have to climb a mountain? Is it a wave way in the distance, or is it something in between? So it helps you understand the general timing of things. We'll talk about an analogy to maybe help understand this a bit. So just think about a bucket of water. You have water coming in at the top, and there's some holes at the bottom. And then you can think about these metrics a bit. So the rate that you're kind of filling the bucket would be how much you're investing into replacement. The holes at the bottom is the rate of deterioration. The amount of value consumed is how far down did that bucket get drained, and the remaining life is how much water is left. The deficit is the water at the bottom that probably should have fell out, but it's still in there. So think about the bucket, and for different assets, you might have the bucket at different lengths. So for maybe water, the bucket might be a little bit more full. Maybe it's a core asset. We need to provide water to our citizens. But other categories, maybe it could be a little bit lower. And that's your decision as a leaders and as a community. Decide how full do you want that bucket. You know, no risk, high level service. You just fill the bucket all the way to the top, but that would be probably pretty expensive for ratepayers. Or you can let the bucket go down. So it's a good conversation. It's a good analogy to think, how full is this bucket for each of our different asset categories? And they have different impacts. Like I said, different investment rates, which hits the taxpayer, and it also has different levels of service related to that. So just a little analogy to think about. So in order to develop the plan, the first step was developing the inventory, which was where most of the work was, to be honest. So for the water system, we had to use GIS and segment the pipes and put all the data and attributes and work with the public works guys and kind of take their knowledge out of their heads and put it into a digital format, which was great. Nye and everyone helped out lots there, appreciate it. We also took a lot of data from the financial system, and really the lens that we took on the inventory is what's repeatable. Because I've seen so many people so many times get real fancy with the inventories, but then they can't repeat it. So the good thing about the GIS and the financial system, there's an audit process, it happens every year. You can repeat the results, you can repeat the inventory results, and that was the main lens. And the reason why that's so important is it's important to track these vital signs over time and observe what's happening. So, you know, you might say, hey, percent remaining life's 50% this year, then it's 48, then it's 47, then it's 40. It might be trending in the wrong direction potentially. So it allows you to observe, is it going up or going down? So that's why repeating the results is very important. The second thing we did was assign service life. So it's an estimation of like, how long does the asset last? Is it 100 years? Is it 80? Is it 20? Most of the service lives assigned in this are based on industry best practice. So you can point to a document, someone's, you know, an engineer or a finance person's wrote in there and it's public. But we've also incorporated some condition information. But overall, it's important to start with the industry best practice number because it kind of paints the bar at the highest level, and then the goal is to refine it from there. So you start with community or industry best practice, which are generic, they're not community specific, and they're conservative. And the goal over time is as you get more data is to start refining those estimates over time.
So if it was a new asset was created, would you just use the design life?
Design life, yep. Yeah. And basically that's what the industry best practice numbers are kind of design life. But they're you know, when you look at design lives, they're very generic. They say 80 years, but they don't consider, well, what community and what operating environment and a lot of this. So you kind of got to move eventually from industry best practice to community specific, which is when NICE guys can say, I've replaced this many times and I know it lasts this long. So, but the nice thing about the industry best practice is you can start comparing yourself also to other communities, observing where their vital signs are at and what's happening. And I'll provide some stories around that as well. Replacement costs. So again, this is what it would cost to replace your assets in today's dollars. This was done on indexing historical costs. So the financial system is really good at understanding what was it originally cost to put in, but it doesn't project what the future cost is. So those are just indexed forward using engineering costs indice. And then also the insurance records was a great source for replacement costs. Again, insurance is great because you get your insurance records updated every couple of years, and you can update that information. And they're based on what it would cost to replace if the asset was to disappear.
Who is typically responsible to update that information? Who in the organization would be charged with doing that?
It would probably be Nye and I, like
Okay.
a combination. There's a financial aspect to it, and then there would be his knowledge.
Okay.
And it is something, as we've talked about, we've got it now, but that would be part of our own routine to update it, or as information
As infrastructure changes.
we would update it. And sort
Just got a
of,
resource for that as a community to make sure you guys have the time to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, good point. So this is now an extra thing, if you think about it, that you're putting onto staff. An important thing, but it is something that wasn't there before. So, but that's the goal. That's why, like, you know, the lens we took is try to make this as easy and as consistent as repeatable as possible. And that's why we've kind of tacked it on to the end of the financial, the way you report out for the financial statements. So it kind of piggybacks on that existing process. Whereas if you try and recreate that, it does become pretty onerous. So, which is hard for a small community with 13 staff. So then you take the inventory, the service life, the replacement costs, you put it into a model, and it shoots out the vital signs, which we'll go through next. I wish it was that easy. So the replacement cost, again, so this is in today's dollars, what it would cost to replace. Like for like doesn't account for new infrastructure level service increases, just, you know, as it stands, this building to replace it with this building. It's not making it more green, it's not expanding it, it's the same building. And on the left-hand side here, comes back.
Are we not paying the bill? Have we paid the electrical bill?
I think so.
Other things to do?
That's an
No, we did
that's
not.
an HMI
Is this a
cable.
cable bill? Yeah, it's the same cable.
Is that a new one?
There you go, you're good there.
this is the one from, we've had this problem before, we don't know what causes it. That's the one.
Don't move.
You just stay there and
Yeah.
you don't mind, right?
Did you want to try the other cable, or?
Swap out the cables in it.
Yeah.
Sure.
There's something going on downstairs. I actually went and checked the.
No, the
chambers,
master
because I
plan
thought
didn't
maybe
name
we
an
were gonna
ultimate
expect a
number,
crowd.
did it?
There's chairs lined up and
The master plan did,
I don't know what's going
I
on.
think it's Saturday.
Oh, it's a strata, like a strata across the road there.
it did talk about a number, but
Didn't come to a bottom line.
no,
Okay,
no. But everything that's in it is priced out.
okay.
Um,
But I thought in their short list, it was only about $30 million or something.
I think it's even larger than that, because some of the assets weren't included in that number, because they didn't have a condition or a life expectancy, so, yeah.
They didn't have a life expectancy like they're dead already?
Well, no, they didn't have a schedule within the 5 years to replace. So if you look at the entire plan, it's larger than that.
Okay. Thank you.
So yeah, these are some interesting numbers. So on the left-hand side, in the middle, that's Lions Bay owns $44 million in infrastructure. Again, interesting fact to start sharing with residents. I don't think they might fully comprehend that you, small community, own, $50 million almost. And then it's broken out by funds. So general fund is your revenue mechanisms, taxation. Then for water, it's through water fees, and then sewer is through, usually through a sewer fee or parcel tax. And then to the right, you can imagine this green is broken down further. So this is how the general fund's broken down. So again, these are the assets funded through taxation. So you can see within the general fund, about half of your values in the general fund, and transportation makes up majority of that, and buildings.
Transportation and roads?
Roads, yeah, roads, yeah. Transportation includes bridges, roads, sidewalks, that sort of thing. So again, nothing too key to take away here. It's just know how much assets you own. It's an interesting fact to share. And this data feeds the replacement schedule. So it will say how big those bars are overall. And when I run the numbers per capita, it works out like you're kind of right in the middle of the pact of what it costs per capita. Any questions about this chart? So you guys are on the board of directors for a $40 million business, $45 million business. Which is pretty cool. I think that's a cool fact, and yeah, it's an interesting.
Is there more detail?
So remaining life, this one's interesting because it tells you how far into the life of the asset you are. Again, think about the bucket and how much water is left in it. So again, as Lions Bay, your bucket's basically half full. So the assets have reached about halfway through their life, which tells me that it's a good time to have the conversation. Like now I can look at these numbers and instantly draw conclusions about a community, and I'd say that's getting to the point where it's a good time to have the conversation. Some communities are lower, and I think maybe I don't say they missed the boat, but maybe they should have had the conversation a little bit while ago. When I look at other communities, the range is about 40 to 55. So you guys are kind of, I'd say, at the lower end, but still kind of in the common range of communities. But instantly you can look at it and it gives you some insights into what assets might be in better condition than others. And again, it's just data, and you can question it, and it's a good thing to question. And it might not be perfect, but it's the first stab, and I think it gives some pretty good insights, and it gives you an overall understanding of the health of your assets.
What's land improvement again?
Good question. So that's parks. So that'd be parks. This is an accounting term, just trying to stay consistent with the system in the accounting world. But yeah, it would include anything within parks. You can see here drainage might, this is pretty funny. You look at these enough and it's like tells the same story, but drainage seems like it's a little bit of a, maybe neglected asset, which is very common. I see that all the time.
Well, that's what it does tell us. It's a very neglected asset.
How is it telling us that? I'm just curious.
Well, 17% of the life is left.
That's the remaining life.
Remaining life,
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, the
it's
previous
a
slide,
deteriorated asset.
the amount of the asset itself was only 310,000 or something like that. So you can see that it's not a big asset, but as we all know in this room. But yeah.
You've had more time to look at these
It's
slides.
interesting how, they don't have, it doesn't add up to 100, it's just, no, okay.
Yeah, it's just relative.
Okay, yeah, sorry,
Okay.
how does that
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't add up
That's
to
what I
100,
thought.
it gives you the
That's right.
relative kind of
Okay.
So if we,
percentage.
we just have a quick talk about an example. So we look at, for example, the water capital, and that was 21.2 million total. or 21.5. And we were about to endeavor on a $3.7 million replacement project. But in the context of our total water assets, it's really not massive. I mean, it's a small percentage. We're fixing a small percentage of our water system. I'm just curious what that would do after we, because that life cycle, that lifespan will change. So what does that do to our
So we're gonna update, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to wonder, does that include assets that we're about to abandon? The value of the water capital. So we have several assets that are now going to become redundant. We're going to abandon. Would they have been included in that number previously?
Yeah,
So it's actually an inflated number then?
well,
Because as we abandon them,
yeah, so annually we update this,
right.
right? So if we abandon an asset, Pam will remove that from the TCA, and there's a process that has to go through to do that, and these charts will update.
So
Right
when we add
now-
assets, like you said, when we add the water tank, it'll be 100% life left.
Exactly, and so this 44% remaining life will actually probably go up quite a bit when we reevaluate next year, so our water will look like it's in good shape.
And that's the importance of the, annual updating, is it's a fluid number. Like it's a number that, also we could just change our estimates of life. We may say, we actually probably have 10 more years on this asset, so as we adjust those, this number will continually change. But
Okay, but to get them, but also adding to that is assets that in water we no longer use. That is actually assuming that we were going to replace them, which we're now going to find out we don't want to replace them.
You're talking about phase 4 and 5 tanks?
For
Yeah.
example.
So, I mean, one of the examples we talked about was abandoning assets that we inherited that are no longer useful, which is
Correct.
exactly what we're doing.
So phase
dumping
4,
the
5,
ledger,
and highway tank
right?
can theoretically
Yes, that's
be.
in our favor. That's
Exactly,
the thing.
exactly. So I'm saying, but this doesn't realise that yet. So
because it's a point in time, this is accurate as of
exactly.
today.
And it assumes we would replace all those tanks, which we're not going to.
It gives us an opportunity to show a big win next year.
Yes,
Yeah.
you see how smart we were.
Right?
It also
So we're
shows like for like replacement, right? So
Yes.
it shows the Harvey tank at the same size when we're upgrading it to a larger tank.
Mhm.
So, yeah, again, once we do the changes, it'll update.
And what's our borrowing limit for our inventory loan?
3 million,
3 even?
Yeah.
Thank you,
of which we've used about 500,000.
thank you.
I like where you're going with this though, because this is now a common language that you can talk about all assets, doesn't matter what you're talking about, it's a common language. And I think as a council and community, people say, well, we have invested in these 3.7 million, and it's a number, but now it's a common framework that you can say, hey, we invested, and the remaining life went from 44% to 55%, it's going up. So it's a good kind of marketing
I think it's a
tool.
good visual tool that people can relate to, and you can tell a story next year. Like we could write a view article and say, look, this is what our asset investments did for us from last year to this year. This is the kind of improvement we saw in life cycle and blah, blah, blah. I feel like it's, makes a lot of sense to me.
And that's why it's a living document. It'll constantly being updated, and then we'll be fine tuning it with more accurate condition assessments on a go-forward basis.
Exactly. I like what you're thinking. And to your point, if you get rid of these assets that are in here, that might also, and it's a good story.
Other ones on average will go up much higher.
Exactly.
Gut feel tells me there's something that drainage one doesn't look right.
So
No.
what do we,
It doesn't, there's got to be a lot more.
There is, that's based on what we know, and we found out with 253, there's culvert in the ground that we didn't know about, and that's not
I don't think we have a good grip on that one yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is a good starting point. It just kind of compiles all your information, and through it, you'll be able to see where you're strong, where you're weak, and maybe you might find out, hey, we're weak on the storm inventory. Let's go improve it. So, good observations. Value consumed. I won't spend too much time on this one. Don't think it's that important. Could actually erase it, but we'll talk about it quickly. It's inversely proportional to remaining life. So 43, it would be 57%, but I just express it as a dollar value. Why? Because it shows you how much financial value has been consumed. Again, helpful when you're thinking about reserves and how much money and how much maybe liability has been consumed, that sort of thing. Again, it's not a great metric to look at, but it is interesting to know 25 million has been consumed.
You said something earlier, and I wrote down reserves does not equal value consumed.
Yes, correct.
Stop. Why wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be good if it did?
So-
Or are you saying it shouldn't or it doesn't?
Yeah, so I agree. I used to always think it should as well, to be honest. But the reason why it doesn't is because if we could grab a magic wand and I knew exactly how long all the assets lasted, and I knew this one's gonna last 28 years, and this one's 26, and this water pipe's 89, and this one's in corrosive soil, so it's 60, then I'd say 100%. But since it's generic service lives, you're taking your best educated guess at it, you know, that number is not exactly bang on. So yes, if you knew exactly how long assets lasted, and you replaced it with all cash, yes, 100%. But we don't know exactly how long all assets last, and it's probably not going to be all replaced with cash. So that's the reason. So I thought that for a while, and I'll kind of dig into the other metrics, and I think it'll make a little bit more sense. But
you know what else this does a good job of highlighting? You know, when you think about how important drainage is to a community, stormwater drainage, and the kind of damage it could inflict if it wasn't maintained properly, we're talking about a
On a
couple
steep slope.
$100,000. Like,
Yeah.
that's nothing compared to the kind of damage it could cause. It's almost a no-brainer that that's the next thing you tackle, is your stormwater management.
Except I think we all agree we're going to find out it's worth a lot more than that. But you're right. If you look at
If you look at the big picture and the kind of damage it can
why not
inflict,
take
right?
the low-hanging fruit is what it seems like. Yeah.
Right. It's a good tool. I like it.
Corey, if I'm going through these slides again, so if I look at the first one we saw, which showed a remaining replacement costs of our assets of $44 million round, then we go forward, and there's about 25 million in life left. So our gap is about 19 or 20 million dollars. We need to fund this.
I'd say no.
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 I like that answer.
Well, actually, yes. I'd say yes.
Oh, don't go on.
I'll agree
Plan to
with
fund it.
you.
I mean,
Yeah,
so yes is the answer,
Well, I'd say yes if
based
you,
on
if you
this
had,
point in time data.
I'd say yes if everyone in the community was like, we have all the money in the world and we want to, replace the assets exactly when they need to be replaced. I'd say, yeah, that's the gap.
Yes.
But usually that's not the reality for a lot of communities. So I'll tell you kind of how we can talk through the gap. That's made a little bit more realistic.
But I'm at 20,000 feet. That is the gap.
That is the theoretical on the paper gap, yes.
I like that. Okay.
recognizing there's other ways to fund it, that's when we
Well,
talked about it not being
recognizing
reserves,
that there
because
are
we're getting a water tank that's being
Short-term,
funded.
long-term
Mhm.
spans of
Right,
life
yeah.
of different stuff, but we're throwing, well, it's just a piece of paper. I mean, it's $1 million, it doesn't mean anything. So if you're trying to plan to, without going to where you're going to go next, the gap is that number, period. Okay,
Yeah, that's the gap as it stands today, yes.
right today.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it might not be due for 20 years.
Well, this is the planning and the replacement thing, kind of thing. So I mean, to me, I'm just looking for the number because then the math starts working in different ways.
But it's a gap we couldn't possibly afford, so now what's the workaround plans for reading?
Yeah. So I mean, you take that gap over theoretically over 30 years, just to pick an average, like how long does the road last? Damn to find
Actually,
out.
not enough.
How long do, I don't know, 30, 25, 35, 50? I mean, it's all various, so I think you end up plugging a number that you feel good with, and there's your surprise tax bill. Okay, gotcha.
I like how you guys are thinking about this though, and the numbers are turning and you're writing numbers down, I like it. So the deficit,
Big picture.
He's
is that
playing with his
an
numbers.
airplane? Is that an airplane? So the deficit, by definition, is the value of assets that are past its estimated service life. So it is actually a dollar value, but I represent it as a percentage of the total replacement cost. I used to do the dollar value, and it just blows people's mind. Like, they're just like, this many million in assets are past their life, and it gets blown out of proportion, and I just think it's not healthy. But when you put it in this perspective, I think it helps. As presented in one community, their deficit was $170 million. And they that's a lot of money. But then they were kind of freaking out about it. And then I said, well, it's only 10% of your asset value. And they're like, oh, that's not bad, and they start selling down. So,
Okay, so give us a sticker shock, what's our number?
well, it's
You have to
11,
tell me now.
it's 11% of the total value,
What is
right?
it?
So,
Oh, it's not.
4.5 million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the deficit is a North Star metric, and the reason why I say that is it provides insights in all different things. So as the deficit goes up, more assets get near the end of their life. That represents a risk to you. It also represents probably level of service. So as more assets get into the deficit, they're getting older, probably lower level of service. Pipes might be breaking, roads might have more holes, that sort of thing. As the deficit goes down, like if you just want it to go away, the roads would be beautiful and the pipes wouldn't be breaking. So the question I think for you to think through is, what is the right deficit level for our community? And again, think about the bucket of water, and different asset categories might have different levels of risk or level of service associated with it. So it provides insight into risk level service, but also it now kind of gives you a little bit of focus on maybe where do we inspect things. So it kind of gives you a lot of insights. But overall, 11% of your assets are in a deficit. It's pretty even between the sewer, the water, and the general. But then you can jump over here, and this is kind of interesting. Now, drainage again, right, pops out. A lot of them are apparently past their service life. So just looking at this, it's just like, hey, low remaining life, large deficit. Maybe that might provide insights into look more into that. Again, tracking this is very important over time, because again, when you invest in that $3.7 million project, what does it do to the deficit? Does it drop it? I think that's a good story. But also, I like to think of the deficit and like start observing what's happening on the ground. Like look at the numbers today, and you know the assets more than me, and just know what's happening and say, hey, at this level, things seem to be running fine. Do we want to keep it at this level, or can we push it up, or do we want to push it down? One thing I like tracking with water is the deficit versus the number of breaks. So you might observe, hey, 11%, we're getting no breaks. Well, let's push it to 15. Oh, no breaks, 20. Oh, we're getting breaks. Then you know your sweet spot might be between 10 and 15%. So again, it's important to track and observe what's happening in the community.
So the deficit on the land improvement is 0 or close to?
Yeah, it's 0. 0 point something. I think that's why it's still in the graph.
It's essentially because land doesn't depreciate, like land's a bit.
We see there's parks.
Yeah, so that's...
Parks, but it's also, sorry, land
There's
as well.
infrastructure
that
on
we own.
parks as well, right?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so it's the infrastructure on parks, and land is actually excluded from this because land is an appreciating asset. This only focuses on
Our beach
depreciating.
park is in that category that we're saying has 0 deficit. That's what their charts tell you.
That's what the data tells. And if you know it's different, which...
Well, it's the next thing we're about to go do.
Mhm.
Why? If that's true, why are we doing it?
Yes. So that's, I think, this is a good example maybe to tug on. So you may know the beach park needs to get replaced. Maybe this doesn't say
It
that.
certainly doesn't, but yeah.
Then you can go in there and maybe look at it and say, adjust the assumption there, push it back. Or vice versa, there very well, and I almost guarantee it, there's probably something in here that you're like, look at it and you're like, this is like brand new. Then you push it out. So again, it's just the data, you can start questioning it. And I think that's where you actually really hone this and calibrate it, if you will, is to start having these conversations.
So I guess the question then would be, has the data been reviewed, the input data, and are we comfortable with it? Because you seem to be uncomfortable with the park piece.
Well, that graph tells me we shouldn't need to do anything.
So
That's
the only
clearly
way
not the
that can be
case.
validated is by going in to say, okay, in this asset management model, is the input data
Correct,
into
yeah.
the parks element, has that been vetted? Are we comfortable with that input data?
Yeah, I have to look at
Did we
that.
miss something?
Because the equipment and the washrooms aren't in that category. They're under equipment and buildings. So I have to go back, and it's a very small number on our financial statements, so that was me. I should have gone back, and I have to vet that number. But in terms of definition, any equipment that we have in the parks and the bathrooms are under buildings, because the bathroom is a building, and the playground equipment is under equipment. So
So
then,
maybe
yeah.
it's litter.
Yeah, good point, good point. And again, it's, I wouldn't take this as like a grand piano where it has all the perfect information, but it starts the conversation, allows you to start questioning things, allows a good conversation to happen. And again, I think of this as like a high level feeling tool. It's like, is my heart rate too high? Is my blood pressure good? Hey, maybe I should start working out a bit more on my bicep because it's smaller than this one or something. It just provides some good direction that way. Any other questions about the deficit? This is my favorite one. You just post it on your wall if you'd like. It's a positive thing though. Don't take it as a negative thing. Don't let people take it as a negative thing. I'd be proud.
One question, is that saying that 50% of all the drainage assets are now beyond their life cycle?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's our biggest scab.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of know that, right? We don't get that.
Yeah.
The black culvert says it all.
More than just that one, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, your focus your focus is that black culvert because it's visual, it's in your eye. But we have culverts that cross under roads, that cross under the highway, that cross under the railway tracks, that are in terrible condition.
well, also the black culvert is where several people drive home past.
Mm-hmm.
My mental picture is the half-shaped culverts that are blowing out of the drainage ditch.
Yeah, on
Because I
Bayview.
drive, I'm glad because
Yeah.
I drive the other way.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mine's in front of my house,
Mm-hmm.
next to my driveway. That grows lawn in it.
Mm-hmm. That's a good thing.
It absorbs the
Pollutants.
drainage. Yeah.
And one thing why I say I'd be proud of the deficit, to a certain extent, everything's good to a certain extent, moderation, it just means that you're, maybe you're doing good maintenance. If assets are lasting longer than they're expecting, maybe maintenance, like good maintenance is happening. And I think if you don't maintain your assets, they're not gonna last as long, and then you're gonna get more into the deficit. So there's definitely a correlation between maintenance, how much you spend, how much is in a deficit, and we'll talk about the life cycle costs in a bit. It can really change the life cycle costs. So it's just like a car, right? If you're driving it and you never change the oil, it's gonna blow up at like 100,000 K. Change the oil, maintain it, 300-400 K, and it should have died, but it's still going, kind of thing. So. The next one is the replacement schedule. Again, looks pretty fancy, I would say. I'd like to think so. And it shows all the assets when they're coming up. Great data, not a capital plan, but it gives you an understanding generally when assets might be hitting their estimated service life. So again, on the left-hand side, the funds, this is the funds, and then this is the general fund. But allows you to understand, are you climbing a mountain? Is there, like some communities, literally, they're brand new, so there's nothing here. And then there's a spike way down the line. Some communities are really old, and it's like literally like this. Like that.
So those are annual and one is 2019, is that what you're saying?
So one is this year. This year is kind of already too late. So that pushes everything out to 2020 and then 30 years ahead. But you generally can see when assets are coming up, kind of the general gist of it. And you can start questioning it like, well, what is this? What is that? And then you can start saying, should we plan for that? Should we not? So again, it's good data, provides some insight. And to your point, the gap you were talking about, the gap's not staying the same. Every year you move on, the gap's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's why I said, if you waited 30 years, all these things are just jumping into that gap.
If I might counter that point.
Yes.
If you are investing, like really doing the infrastructure now, not saving for it, but actually doing it and putting it in place, and let's say, just to pick you're doing a couple $1 million a year, you're actually not, the gap may not be growing, it may be staticking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the water bucket, right? If you're dumping water in, it might stay at the same level.
Okay.
So if we resource level that, do you have any idea what it is?
So we'll talk about the life cycle costs next, and then there's a good discussion there. But yeah, you're right. think about the bucket. If you're investing at a right rate, say at the same rate the water is leaving the bucket, it'll just stay static. If you're not investing enough, eventually the water is going away. And if you invest too much, it's overflowing. So I just did like a rolling average, because I always like to see is it a mountain or a valley or you know. So you know, it looks like in the next 5 years, it's kind of just like, you know, doing this. But then you can see there's significant costs that are coming up, you know, within the next 6 to 20 years. So I think that's an interesting fact. It looks like an iceberg, yes.
Don't say iceberg. Terrible analogy.
Maybe a bad analogy. But in general, your costs are trending upwards.
In different finance worlds, there's different amortization periods.
Mm-hmm.
So for a small business, it might be for a capital loan, it might be 3 years, depending on the size of the business. Could be up to 10 years for a larger corporate, if they can't go to the bond market or something like that. So if you've got Village of Lions Bay Corporation, and we have been incorporated 50 years, and much of those pipes are 50 years old. So some of them may be near the end, some of them are actually robust. Depends on the terrain, depends on, you get the whole idea. So I guess, where is a good rule of thumb in municipal world for, I mean, I can't ask Pam because now we're talking accounting world, and that's a different thing. So then we're into actual consultant replacement world. And I have no idea, but if I took 30 years for a road, or 30 years for a pipe, or 30 years for this, or a treatment plant, or something like that, I don't think I'm going to be far off. Is that a kind of good little rule of thumb, or no?
Yeah, so the lifespans currently used in the model are industry best practice. So
Have we come to that yet?
What's this?
Are we coming to that?
We're coming to it a bit, but they're industry best practice,
Okay.
which I would say who built them? Engineers, finance people, pretty conservative people, I'd say. And they're generic. They're like, everyone shall use this, no matter if you're in Antarctica or Hawaii. And it's like, so anyways,
It just drives the mathematical formula.
Yes,
So that's only one piece of the formula.
yes.
Okay, so,
Harvey's a perfect example, right? It was designed to a 100-year life cycle and it failed after 40.
well, again, it's your averaging, because a bunch of them are gonna make it to 100, and some of them aren't, and you can't predict who's gonna win the lottery or lose it. So, I mean, I'm just, from a finance standpoint, I'm just trying to get to the number, so that once you know your gap and you're replacing it, and
Isn't it 2% a year, assuming 50-year life cycle? You could inside 2% of your assets a year.
okay.
It depends. So if they all lasted around 100 years, there's a lot of assets that last 10 years, 20, some are 100. So it all depends. So we'll get to the number when you stack that all up, what it comes out to.
But it's a build reserve thing. And I mean, some last longer, some last less. I mean, you gotta have the dough's gotta be in the kitty. That's the piece. And it's either you've got the cash in the kitty, or you're doing the replacement as we speak.
And as much as the industry best practice are built by engineering and finance people, like you said, some last more than that and some last less, to your point. So I found it kind of just works out in the end, like on average.
Well, that's what I think that's where I'm going. You can't pick the winner, because we won't be around long enough to find out which road had a sinkhole and which tower lasted 100 years.
100%, yeah. So,
I think you mentioned earlier on, though, that you start with the model, you feed in all your data, but while the average life cycle might be 50 years for something, because of our climate and our historical knowledge of staff having to replace things 2 or 3 times over the past 30 years, they know it's going to last 36, 30 years, something like that. So I think that you're gonna have different life cycles, no average, just, you're gonna have different things for different areas. And we're, you know, over time, we're going to drill down on all of this information and make it Lions Bay specific, with the knowledge that we have from our history. And so it will become more and more accurate over time. But I'm just wary of jumping to conclusions based on, here's the model, and here's the deficit, and here's the plan to address it. I think, I don't want to move, my caution would be that we shouldn't move too fast towards A plus B equals C. Let's get to C as fast as we can.
You're killing me, Peter. You're just killing me.
I know, because you want to get to C. I can tell.
Are we still talking? There, okay,
But what we're going to start to focus on eventually is the trend, right? And so how much do we improve it next year from last year and so on. It's the trend that we're all going to care about. As long as the trend gets to a positive value before everything goes to oh heck, then we should be okay.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, it's a journey. I think that was one of the points. It's a journey. So it's not just about getting to the end point right away. It's about taking the data, understanding it, and then maybe getting to it tomorrow. I like that vision. But it does take time to get to the number. And I'll talk about this number and what it means and how we can work to something that might be a little bit different. So life cycle costs, what is it? It's a pretty simple formula. All it is, like I said, this laptop, $100, last 10 years, put $10 away a year, boom, that's life cycle cost. So this would be ideally how much on average, if you replace all the assets at the end of their life, if we had a magic wand, we could estimate it, and you're to replace it with cash. So it kind of paints I think, the upper limit of maybe what the funding target is. And interesting enough, if you actually did fund this, your deficit would just go away. So it would just disappear. So to me, and this is just like a realization I was telling you guys like 2 weeks ago, you go to conferences, you read books, everyone's like life cycle funding, boom, boom, boom. And it just took me a while to question that. And I don't think this is the answer. Because again, the deficit would just go away. It would be the answer if you had all the money in the world. So it's a good starting point. It sets the bar. And the goal, and we'll talk about, is to kind of like move that bar down based on your decision of how low you want to bring it, and then your revenues here, and then develop a strategy to bridge the gap. So you can see here, on total it's 1.2 million per year on average. You can see on the general fund how much, so that's taxation. This is rates, sewer rates, and this is water rates. And then you can see the breakdown within the general fund. But again, I write here, it doesn't take into account communities' willingness to pay, level of service, and the financing ability of the Lions Bay. So it's a good starting point for a good conversation. You guys have any questions about
So when you
the life
say,
cycle?
who's having this conversation? So, because is it just, you know,
Us as
people in the
council or
know,
with the
or
community?
is this because how do you're teaching us a lot here, you know, and you talk about a conversation, how do you have this conversation with residents? You know, if you do the quick math, you're saying, okay, this is $2,400 a head, or $2,400 a household per year that we're gonna add to your tax bills to fund our deficit. That's not an easy conversation to have.
Yeah.
So how would you propose educating residents?
Yeah, so I don't think this is the number that I would say you need. Everyone else says it is, but I'm just learning that no, I don't think it is. And I'll tell you kind of a couple of reasons why. But yeah, I think this is a great conversation with residents. It's all a choice. Whether you fund this at 1.2, 600, 200, 100, 750, doesn't matter the number. It's all a decision that you as community leaders can make with the residents, right? And they all come at different advantages. So you invest this much, you're gonna have a high level of service, low risk, and that's a decision. But are people willing to pay that? If you fund it at a lower level, you're taking on more risk, you're probably gonna be driving on older roads, you might have your water break, and you might be out of water for a week. Those are all decisions, but it means you're paying less. So kind of the way I think about it, actually, is trying to think about, because these are vital signs for your infrastructure. Think about vital signs for your health. Like, it's your choice. You could pay a lot of money for organic food, and you could hit the gym, and boom, boom, boom. You'd reduce your risk of having heart attacks, but it comes at a cost. And you'd be feeling good. That's a high level service. Or you don't want to invest in good food and the gym and that sort of thing. Then you're going to probably feel worse. You're going to have a higher risk of heart attacks, that sort of thing. So there's no right answer. It's a conversation, and it's a healthy one to have.
So that's the number if you want to, if your strategy is sticker shock, right? That's the number.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm
That's
getting
you
at.
tell people.
Yeah.
Is it a case of pay me now or pay me later? Or is it a case of if we don't pay, we're going to suffer a lot of aggro?
So, okay, so I forgot to tell this story, but I think it's a good one. So this is interesting. Again, you can start seeing trends and you observe what's going on. So I calculate this for one community X, won't name them, but their deficit was around 40%. So it was quite a bit higher. But they were in a state of, actually kind of feel bad. They literally budget $1 million a year, and they have no capital plan, and they just sit behind their desk and they just pray that something doesn't happen, and then water main breaks, drop money on it, and they do half the amount of work because it's emergency repair. Then they wait, and every year they budget $1 million, they spend it all on emergency. So
it's just in time, like the retailers.
totally. So to your point, it's if you wait too long, you get to a very reactive state, and just running the numbers so many times, little differences today have huge impacts in the future. Like a 1%, I think people would rather have 1%, 2%, whatever it is, over the long term. That adds up cumulatively, from a finance background, the compounding of that versus waiting. So yeah, to your point, if you wait, it could get to that situation. You're not in that today, and that's where I think the
So
opportunity
you're
lies.
suggesting starting off with a lower, levy, whatever you want to call it, reserve levy, and investing it for return?
Yeah, no, just I think just.
No, I'm just asking because why not? It's like an RSP for the village. I mean, you just put the money away, and then 20 years from now, it's grown to, I don't know, what an investment could possibly do. Can we do that? Is that an option?
Yeah, are we allowed as a village?
Well, you're restricted in what you can invest in. I think it's more cumulative that you increase it by 1%, and next year that 1% is on the prior year plus the 1%. So when you go from year 1 to 10, it's not, you haven't gone up 10% in taxation, you've gone up more. Because each 1% builds on the prior year's taxation, which was already 1% higher. If you get rid
Sure,
of
but
it.
I mean, is investing not an option for?
Oh, we do invest in, no,
You
yeah,
would do
you
that
would.
already?
Oh, yeah, you would, but
Yeah, do
just,
that already.
We
you're
do
not
that already.
allowed to invest your money in the stock market or anything, because you can't put taxpayers' money
No,
at risk, so it's GICs.
Getting your
and-
GIC,
But yeah,
so
you
you're
can
getting something
invest.
out of it.
Yeah, I think that's more
Can't
than
invest
meant
in
to be
Tesla.
cumulative.
Can invest that, but just people can relate to RSPs, they can relate to saving for the future.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's, I mean, it's just.
That is the idea, that
There are
if you
ways-
had a levy, the levy would go into a reserve to be, and it would accumulate every year.
So yeah, I think the point is, just starting today is a good step. Like just realizing that, hey, we should be starting today. Starting with something, and then having the conversation. You asked, how do you have the conversation? There's a lot of different ways. You can start educating through newsletters. You can start, what I'm a big fan of is like reporting this in like an annual report, where like you're reporting on the state of your infrastructure in your community. Start educating people on what these metrics actually mean, how they're changing with your investments, and just educating people. It's funny, I was presenting to a group of farmers the other day. I was telling this story. I come into the room and, kind of Jim at the back or whatever, he's in his 70s pickup truck with his pitchfork, and I don't even turn on my computer, and he's like, we're not raising rates. And I was like, ooh, this is gonna be interesting. But I told the story, I just showed the data, had the conversation, and at the end he put up his hand and he said, are you sure we're raising rates enough? So it was kind of interesting, his perspective changed once he had the info. So I think, yeah, educating people helps. Because people are smart, they understand when you put the info in front of them. So. But there's lots of different ways to do that. So the life cycle costs. The next thing, so talk a little bit about the gap here and just give you a little bit of perspective. So here's the general fund, again, taxation. So you can see the life cycle costs up at, you know, $235,000 per year. We got here, funds available for capital. Maybe I'll let Pam explain what that is.
Basically what we did is we looked at our consistent sources of revenue, so that would be our property taxation, our utilities, the small communities grant, our fees and charges, things we can rely on getting consistently every year, our normal revenue. We didn't include any grants, any loans, because that's kind of extraordinary revenue. And then I took from that just our normal operating expenses. And it does fluctuate from year to year, but generally every year we have about $300,000 left after that to fund capital. So we sort of have a starting point with a minimal, with our usual tax increase.
So this is the current amount of money that you could invest in capital as it stands today. So you can see the life cycle is 600
So, no, for 1 year.
for 1 year.
In 1 year, yeah.
1 year.
It doesn't tell us what we've got and what we've got.
Yeah, and that's if we don't buy any other capital like that. So that's every year we do purchase capital that we need for things that need immediate replacement. So we wouldn't necessarily have that 300 to put in a reserve, but at the same time, if we're replacing capital that year that needs to be replaced, it still helps our deficit.
And then here's the replacement additions 5-year rolling average. So some years it's up, some years it's down, etc. So this is this is replacement addition. So this is what you have on average been spending. So it's an interesting picture. And actually when you run the calculations, I think the deficit's around 12% today. If you keep with this, with 300, if you spend all 300K just on assets, in I think 20 years, your deficit would jump up to around 30%. So it goes from 12 to 30. And that's based on the replacement schedule and you know how much coming in. So I think it's an interesting fact that, you know, if you keep operating at the way you do, the deficit will increase, which isn't a bad thing, but it's a decision. Do you want it to, do you not? Do you want the bucket to drop? Do you want, like, what level do you want the bucket to be at? So I think it's an interesting slide for that reason. Any questions about?
That's just the general, that's not the sewer or the water fund.
Yes, correct. This is just taxation. Yeah. Roads, buildings, parks, fleet. Yeah.
Oh, is there much more to cover?
No, we're pretty much done. So if you, yeah.
Okay, well, if you're gonna just wrap it up, I got a couple more minutes. This is interesting, so.
No pressure.
Okay, I'll go speedy. Put on fast forward. So same graph, but this is for the water system. So again, life cycle costs, how much you have available. It's interesting, right? Because you can see water is maybe doing a little bit better than general, just purely by looking at the graph. Again, not saying this is the target, but you can see this one's closer to that. So that's kind of interesting. And again, you can see what you've been replacement additions on average. And then here's the sewer. So again, I think on the water, again in 20 years, the deficit would move from about 11% up to 30. So about 3 times as bigger. And then sewer, there's not a lot of assets. So anyways, a lot of them are coming up for replacements, getting old, I guess. The deficit I think would go from 14 to like 80% in 20 years. So it like, why? Because there's a lot of assets in the older system. They're all in the 20-year horizon. So it's a good conversation. So where do you go from here, right? So everyone would say fund the life cycle target, read all the books, but you're right here, and you have some money that's available for capital. So I think the goal is to bring down this funding target to a certain level, maybe this yellow star, based on risk and level of service. So base, you get, like I said, people around the table, community, etc. Is how much risk do you want to take on, and what kind of level of service do you want? And there's an complicated way to do that and an easy way. But I think starting with the easier way is a good starting point. You bring it down to a certain level. You all agree as community leaders, you say, this is our long-term funding target. Everyone's behind it. Then you create a financial strategy to say, we're here, and we want to get here. And you say, how fast do we want to get there? Is it in 5 years? Is it 10? Is it 15? Is it 20? And you slowly start ramping revenues up. And once you figure out that number, you can say, hey, we've set a sustainable number that our infrastructure will be healthy now and into the future. So that's kind of how you go. And some people, like I said, they talk about this life cycle target. I think that's an unrealistic number, unless you have all the money in the world. Any questions about this and what this means?
So we
What's that
decrease.
access? Is that, oh, go ahead, sorry.
This is dollars. Yeah.
So we're going to decrease the level of service and increase the risk till we get to a sort of reduced number of the theoretical number, which is the life cycle cost. I don't understand, why aren't we just getting ourselves deeper and deeper in the hole? Because that gap is still there.
Because we're dribbling something in all the time, or it's a slow bleed.
It's an interesting, well, like, you know.
So if you ask me now, just gut feel, no numbers, what do I feel about the village as a whole? I would say I would be uncomfortable with any less of a level of service, because we probably just about cover what we do, and there's all kind of risk that we currently carry. So to ask me to take a fairly aggressive strategy in increasing that risk, I just don't see why I'm getting myself deeper and deeper in the hole.
I think that's kind of the purpose of this graph, is that you fluctuate it, and for increasing the revenues, that can be through taxation, but if we're successful with grants, that line gets steeper as well.
Yeah.
So again, I think it's not a fixed graph. I think
mean-
it was more, because I agree that is a pretty steep
not this-
line, risk and level of service, but it's just showing how it all interacts, and
Okay, so sorry, I'll just say one thing, then I'll stop and give you some else. So that, from what you're saying, Pan, then, as we do that, and assuming we get some grants in infrastructure, the life cycle funding target also decreases. It comes down. It doesn't stay flat line like it is.
Well, I think you're tugging on an interesting, there's a couple things I want to tug on, but say you get more assets, like say you get a grant, and maybe it's not to replace your assets, but it's this new, I don't know, community center. Well, guess what? This just went up.
Yeah.
So you're kind of adding to the weight on your back. And I think that's a good point. Like if you as leaders say, we don't want to drop the level of service, we want to increase the risk, then that's your choice, and you can move this star wherever you want. It's totally up to you. And they have different impacts on revenue generation that you need, which is a decision. But I think funding, like if you were to fund the life cycle, that I think you'd say level of service increase. Again, your deficit would just like disappear. So I would say it's probably not this, unless people are really willing to pay that much, then for sure. But it's not this. It's probably something.
But to Pan's point, that isn't necessarily a flat line, because if, for example, we replace the water tanks with something that's new, that's actually going to trend down and get closer to the star. And I was seeing the life cycle as a flat line because that's where it's drawn, but it's not necessary. Okay.
Yeah, and if you just conclude that maybe some tanks could get, I think you said some tanks could go away.
Yeah.
Well, that's a way to bring that down.
Yeah.
So you can get rid of inherited assets. Would be another way.
I mean, wouldn't it be the first exercise to identify the riskiest assets and target those first? So the things that we can kind of let slide that are less critical, you know, okay, roads, we'll patch those for a while, or whatever assets, you know, okay, buildings, we can patch that for a while, but something like a water tank, for example, that's a high risk. That fails, we're in big trouble. That one we have to fund fully. We have to target, so okay, it needs to be replaced in 25 years, we're gonna start funding that for 25 years. Like, I think we have to assign the risk as the council, we have to assign what gets priority, and then that's how we get to that star.
But we're not creating silos for each of these assets. We're not doing silo accounting, saying that we're putting aside, you know, 100% for that asset.
You're just allocating priority.
That's all I'm saying.
yeah.
Yeah, the financial thing is a separate thing, that's a priority.
In terms of what you go for grants and what would be your preferred next
Yeah.
project, but having, as Peter said, that pool of money, because the unexpected does happen, and we don't have enough money to, you know, we have to keep all our money as general as possible, so we can just pull it when we need it.
when you do get grants, then that bottom line will go up. So it'll help push you closer to your targets.
Yeah, the revenue line gets steeper, like you're achieving your revenue faster.
I think that's a really good point, right? And I think that's why it's, if you update this annually or however often, say if you do get a grant, maybe it means, you know, say you let's just pretend, you know, we end up at this target, we know maybe it equals a 2% increase per year, and then all of a sudden one year you get a grant, well now you can reevaluate and say, do we have to go up 2? Maybe it's 1, or that sort of thing. So I think grants play into it, and to your point, the risk piece, think about the buckets of water, and different assets can have different amounts of water, different risks, and that equates to the star moving, you know, depending how full and empty different buckets are, they can move. And to Peter's point is you want to keep that money liquid because, you know, who knows, maybe you have to spend it over here, but you're planning to spend it here, so. Any questions about the fictitious diagram? So just to wrap it up so we can let everyone go. So kind of the recommended next steps, just kind of based on what I found working with a lot of different communities. Again, it's totally up to you, it's your community. But I think something that piggybacks good on this kind of project, because it's very expense focused, is to refine that target, so it's up here, is to bring it down based on, again, your willingness to take on risk, the level of service. Again, there's different varying levels you can go. You get real crazy on that, or you keep it pretty high level. So bring that target down, different ways to do that. Then, once you know, and you're sitting around the table, you say, this is the number we want, this is the number. Then you develop a revenue plan to meet that target. Is it 10 years, 5 years? And then another thing that's interesting, like I said, is to develop some sort of annual reporting template that you can start showing the public, you know, educating them on these metrics or vital signs. How are they trending? Are they going up? Are they going down? Because then you can start observing what's happening and how they're trending. So,
when you said go crazy on this, you mean number one, by refining your assets one by one, sort of figure out exactly how long they're going to last, and is that what you meant?
well, like this, so these are pretty like crazy words. Risk, level of service. Like you can get like really nerdy on it, like pretty quick, and spend a lot of money, you know, documents, and this is our documented level of service and rah rah, or you can keep it higher level. So different levels of level of effort can be put in that. I would suggest keeping it less level of effort at the beginning, high level, but yes. Yeah. It's kind of like saying, I want to buy a car. I could buy a Lamborghini, but you know, let's get the Toyota Yaris for now. Gets us to the school and back, and then maybe one day we'll, you know, get the Lambo. I don't know if that was a good example, but.
So we've basically built a model now of our community, and you're talking about recalibrating that once a year, once every 2 years. Who would do that? We bring you guys in to do that again, or? So again, that would fall on you guys.
We would do it, but I think it's okay, I'll talk about something. We've had this presentation before and a few points came up. We took the approach that we would use the information we have, the infrastructure master plan and various information, and some of this information may not be completely accurate, and that's what we're fine tuning as well. Like a next step could be with our asset management plan, we could go for another grant, and maybe fine tune some of the condition assessments to really understand how long the assets are going to last, because you can tell just by looking at that number, we probably don't have the right number in for the sewer treatment plan, and perhaps we have to adjust the life expectancy of the sewer treatment plan. And that's a perfect example of changing information in the 2 weeks since this was first presented to us. But Corey gave an example. I like that one where the, maybe you can share it, the community decided to do all the detail first and how much it cost them.
Yep. Yeah, so that's an interest, like, again, you can get real nerdy with it pretty quick. So there's two approaches, top-down, bottom-up approach. Kind of the asset management BC, and what I kind of encourage is start with the top-down, which is just take the data you have and put it into the model. But this one community I was working with, they went bottom-up. They spent $800,000 or something on data. They surveyed everything, they looked at it. And then, ran the numbers, and the life cycle target, I think, was around, I can't remember the number, it was around 30 million or something. And then I did the top down, and it was like 28 million. So it was so close, and you're talking pretty high level financial planning, that the data at the end of the day didn't really make a big difference. So there's a fine balance there, and I support them in getting the data in that now they have this crazy data, they can start capital planning. And they're a bigger city, so maybe they needed it, but I don't think it helped them get farther down this conversation of getting to a sustainable funding level. So.
All right, well, thank you very much for that. I'm going to excuse myself now. That was great. You guys all have a great rest of your evening.
You too.
Thank you.
And maybe one last thing, I just want to iterate this just very, very quickly, is the life cycle cost inputs here. If you're doing good maintenance and everything, your assets are going to last longer, which means that number is going to drop down. So again, it's not just capital, it's maintenance that you have to think about as well. So, nice, that's it.
Thank you very much. Last chance for questions. Neville? Okay, good. Norm, last chance.
It's not my last chance.
Fred?
I don't have a question. I just think this is music to my ears because it's frustrated me for I don't know how long, even from when I was working in a different municipality. We had, I forget what year it was because I've talked to Pam about this and I got the wrong year, so I'm doing the wrong guy. But I actually heard a lecture in an officer's training course where the guy said that the people of today should not have to pay for the assets of tomorrow. They should be spending to maintain it now, and the people of the future should borrow to improve it. And I thought, it really bugged me because I think we've been given a gift by those that have gone before us at a certain level of infrastructure. And I think as you use it, you depreciate it, and at very least you should be replacing your use out of it. And I think that's where you're going with this. We're not trying to overhaul the whole city, but we're certainly trying to make ourselves less consumers and wasters of an asset and giving something for the next generation.
Well said.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Corey. Okay, so let's move this on. Thank you, and public questions, and this will be a time.
Isaiah would ask as well.
Good, thank you. There being none. Motion to adjourn. Thank you. Second, all in favor. Yes, we are done. Let's call it 8:30.
Thanks for having me out. If you have any questions,